I think that in spite of the inflammatory title of this video, everybody would agree with me about one thing. Starship is primarily designed for Mars, and just about everything that we've been watching with Starship's testing lately has been focused on reaching Mars rather than the Moon. Atmospheric re-entries, heat shields, virtually nothing is being done when it comes to lunar landings, in spite of the fact that SpaceX has a contract to put astronauts on the surface of the Moon as soon as possible with Lunar Starship. And this is in sharp contrast to what the People's Republic of China is doing right now, testing the landing process with their prototype lunar lander under simulated lunar gravity. These are the sorts of tests one would expect with a lunar lander in development. And Elon Musk himself has been talking about how the Moon really shouldn't be our goal anyway. He talks about the Moon as being a distraction. And I'm not terribly surprised by all of that, because when it comes right down to it, it is very unlikely that he's going to be able to carry out his contract with Lunar Starship this decade, and more experts and government officials have started to come to that realization, to the point now to where NASA is looking for alternatives. They have come to the realization that Lunar Starship, at least as far as beating China to the lunar surface is concerned, is not going to get the job done, and they need to find a new solution soon. But what could this solution possibly be at this 11th hour? We're going to find all of that out right now. Good afternoon, spaceflight enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Bulletin. Once again, I am not thrilled about what I'm reporting on. A lot of people probably think that I am so happy to be right about Starship. For NASA to conclude what I've known for years, that Starship just was not going to be able to get the job done for Artemis promptly enough. There were just too many milestones in front of this rocket to allow it to safely put human beings on the surface of the Moon by 2026, 27, 28. As a matter of fact, NASA is starting to discover that Lunar Starship is unlikely to put anybody on the surface of the Moon before 2030, at least not on a lunar landing site that isn't a flat concrete pad or isn't a prepared landing site. That would be a lot safer for a tall, top-heavy vehicle like Starship. And that's just one, by the way, of the so many milestones that Starship needs to overcome, needs to accomplish before we can even look at putting humans on the surface of the Moon with this thing. I mean, we're talking about mastering the process of launching this thing, getting into orbit, having it re-enter safely. I mean, even if the idea is to just keep expending upper stages on Starship and using those to refuel without even trying to do the re-entry process, for one thing, that's going to end up costing a lot more money than Elon originally quoted. Where's that money going to come from? Is Elon going to pay for it personally? Well, based on fixed price contracts, it should. But again, faced with no other alternative, NASA may have no choice but to pay those sorts of prices if they want to get the job done in anything resembling a reasonable time frame. And that's just the reusability part. We're also talking about the refueling part. At least 10 refuelings, some estimates say as high as 20 refuelings are going to be necessary to completely gas Starship up sufficiently in order to execute a trip out to the Moon, docking with the Orion spacecraft, landing on the Moon, lifting off, redocking with the Orion spacecraft so that Orion can safely bring the astronauts back home. And then, of course, we're not even talking about the challenge of trying to land this thing on the surface of the Moon. So many difficulties here. I mean, Starship has been able to land on a landing pad a grand total of one time so far, and that was SN-15. And even SN-15 had a very rough landing. It was on fire when it landed and such. It's just was not pretty, and it's probably going to be a while before SpaceX is able to master the whole landing procedure of setting down on the lunar surface in notoriously bad terrain, and that is the lunar South Pole. It's a very, very rough place to try to find a flat, safe spot to set down on. I mean, the list of challenges go on and on and on, and NASA has finally figured out, as a matter of fact, they've known this for some time, I think, that it's just not a realistic thing to expect that Lunar Starship is going to be ready to get this job done by 2030, by the time China is scheduled to land on the moon. And so Secretary Duffy, who has boldly declared that we are absolutely going to beat China back to the moon, of course, people will argue over and over again that we've already been there, we've already beaten China to the moon. Those arguments are absolute rubbish. They mean nothing. Even though Apollo accomplished great things back in the day, it did nothing to exploit lunar resources, to do the things that we are trying to do today, establish a permanent presence on the moon so we can start taking advantage of everything that's there. Apollo never got the opportunity to do any of those things. And so as a result, in many ways, we are starting over. And whoever wins this race is going to be able to establish ownership of the prime landing sites, the best landing sites with the flattest surface and also the closest to lunar ice, to the resources that are going to be necessary to really turn a lunar landing site into a lunar base. So all that having been said, what's going to happen next? So in the course of this part of the video, I'm going to be quoting extensively from an article written by Eric Berger at Ars Technica. I find it very interesting to be quoting so much from Mr. Berger right now, given the fact that he was the biggest champion of Starship for years. He felt that SLS needed to be dumped and completely replaced by Starship for journeys to the moon and to every place else. And now, ironically, he's talking about solutions to replace Starship, given the fact that it's not going to get the job done. So he quotes Jim Bridenstine, a recent quote that the former NASA administrator, who by the way was appointed by Donald Trump during his first administration, had to say about our current situation with Artemis. Quote, "Unless something changes, it is highly unlikely that the United States will beat China's projected timeline to the moon's surface." As the debate about NASA potentially losing the second space race to China heats up in Washington, D.C., everyone is pointing fingers, but no one is really offering answers to how to beat China's ambitions to land taikonauts on the moon as early as the year 2029. So I will. And yes, I agree, by the way, with what Mr. Berger has to say in the course of this article, just to be clear before we get going. So he covers a number of things that really caused us to fall behind, and I'm not going to reiterate all of that. After we lost Columbia back in 2003, a lot of soul searching was done at NASA as new objectives were examined. Actually, the idea of returning to the moon came up during the Bush administration and then got shut down subsequently. And it's only since the first Trump administration and Jim Bridenstine that the whole idea of going back to the moon got rekindled. But the whole thing was just a mess. But in any event, when the new leader of NASA, Jim Bridenstine, managed to ditch a journey to Mars that was envisioned at the time and establish a new lunar program, any efforts to consider alternatives to the SLS back in 2017 were quickly rebuffed by the U.S. Senate. And when I first started this channel back in late 2019, early 2020, I was still talking about replacing SLS with Starship alternatives or some other alternative from going to the moon. But we should have made those decisions then. The replacement should have been started then. And now that we don't have a replacement for SLS, at least not a viable one, really our best option is to try to find some sort of late stage solution for HLS and keep everything else. That is to say, keep the parts that work Orion, and SLS and replace the parts that don't work, or more specifically, the parts that aren't going to work in time. And NASA didn't really begin funding work on an HLS system until late 2021. And this was number one, because a decision was made to build an HLS so late in the game, and number two, because Blue Origin filed a protest and a lawsuit which delayed the whole HLS program for at least 6 months. Now, unlike me, Berger does not target the decision that was made to go with Lunar Starship in the first place as the major mistake that was made in delaying our landing on the moon, even though I tend to believe that that decision is really what put us significantly behind at this stage, because everything else in the process is essentially completed, from SLS to Orion to everything else. We can get astronauts to cislunar space, we just can't get them to the lunar surface, and we shouldn't have gone with such a complicated solution for a lunar lander. That being said, though, the biggest hurdle is the complexity of the mission with Starship. Just to be clear, to fully fuel a Starship in low Earth orbit to land on the moon would require multiple Starship tanker launches from Earth. No one can quite say how many, because SpaceX is still working to increase the payload capacity of Starship, and no one has real-world data on transfer efficiency and propellant boil-off. Propellant boil-off being what happens to supercooled propellants when they are in orbit, exposed to the heating of the sun every time they orbit the Earth and are exposed to direct sunlight. But the number is probably at least a dozen missions. One senior source suggested that it may be as 20 to 40 launches. The bottom line, it's a lot. 20 to 40 launches of the biggest rocket in human history just to put 2 astronauts on the lunar surface? Frankly, in my opinion, it's ridiculous. SpaceX is far and away the highest performing space company in the solar system, says Mr. Berger, and I agree, but putting all of the pieces together for a lunar landing will require time. Yeah, I would say lots of time. Privately, SpaceX officials are telling NASA it can meet a 2028 timeline for Starship readiness for Artemis astronauts, but that seems very optimistic. Actually, in my opinion, that seems completely unrealistic. And according to Mr. Berger, it's not something I would feel comfortable betting on, especially if China plans on landing on the moon before 2030. They're actually shooting for 2029. So Duffy's continued public insistence that he will not let China beat the United States back to the moon rings hollow. The shrewd people in the industry I've spoken with say that Duffy is an intelligent person and is starting to realize that betting the entire farm on SpaceX at this point would be a mistake. Yeah, it was always a mistake. It would be nice to have a plan B, but please stop gaslighting us. Stop blustering about how we're going to beat China while losing a quarter of NASA's workforce and watching your key contractors struggle with growing pains. Let's have an honest discussion about the challenges and how we'll solve them. So here's a number of different solutions that NASA is looking at right now. Number one is something called a stubby Starship. Multiple people have suggested this option, including Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut. Two of the biggest issues with Starship are the need for many refuelings and its height, making it difficult to land on uneven terrain. NASA does not need Starship's incredible capability to land 1 to 200 metric tons on the lunar surface, which, by the way, it's not capable of doing now. It's not even capable of bringing 100 to 200 metric tons to orbit. That being said, it needs fewer than 10 tons for initial human missions. Yeah, that's true. Funny that not too many people were talking about that before. It's not clear how feasible this would be beyond armchair engineering. I would say it would be incredibly difficult. You're essentially designing a brand new rocket and hoping that you can get it into service in the next 5 years. That's never been done. Even SpaceX has never done that, and I don't see how they can do it now, especially with the funding that they have at the moment. And also, Musk wants Starship to get taller, not shorter, so SpaceX is probably not willing going to do this. So once again, as I suggested in the title, SpaceX needs to be dumped. Now, another possibility is that NASA might surge CLPS funding or CLIPS funding and use that money to develop a new lunar lander. NASA has been awarding relatively small amounts of funding to private companies to land a few hundred kilograms of cargo on the moon. NASA could dramatically increase funding to the program, say $10 billion, and offer prizes for the first and second companies to land 2 humans on the moon. This would open the competition to other companies beyond SpaceX and Blue Origin, such as Firefly, Intuitive Machines, and Astrobotic. The problem is that time is running short, and scaling up from 100 kilograms to 10 metric tons is an extraordinary challenge. Yeah, I would say an impossible challenge if we're only talking about 5 years. Another solution is to build the lunar module, that is to say, the original lunar lander, because NASA already landed humans on the moon, and Grumman built the lunar module, so why not just have them do it again? Some traditional contractors have been already telling NASA and Trump officials that this is the best option, and such a solution with enough funding and cost-plus guarantees, in other words, give us as much money as we need and we'll get the job done, could be built in 2 to 3 years. But the problem is that, sorry, the traditional space industry just isn't up to the task. It took more than a decade to build a relatively simple rocket based on the space shuttle. The idea that a traditional contractor will complete a lunar module in 5 years or less is not supported by any evidence in the last 20 years. And by the way, I 100% agree with Mr. Berger on this topic as well. And also, the flimsy lunar module that we used in the 60s and early 70s would not likely pass NASA's present-day safety standards. So another possibility is to distract China. I don't know why Mr. Berger threw this one in, but it is interesting. I guess he included it for completeness. As to how to distract China, use your imagination, but he would submit that ULA snipers or starting a war in the South China Sea is not the best way to go about winning the space race. Okay, so we've read this far, or that you've been watching the video this far, and thank you very much for doing that. What's the damn answer? Well, the answer is Blue Origin's Mark I lander, or that's what Mr. Berger thinks. Let's see what he has to say about that. The company has finished assembly of the first Mark I lander and will soon ship it from Florida to the Johnson Space Center in Houston for vacuum chamber testing. A Pathfinder mission is scheduled to launch early next year. It will be the largest vehicle to ever land on the moon. It's not human-rated, however. It was designed as a cargo lander, but there have been some key recent developments. About 2 weeks ago, NASA announced that a second mission of Mark I will carry the Viper rover to the moon's surface in 2027. The Viper being designed to look for lunar ice in advance of a human landing in a couple of years after the Viper landing. At least that was the intent. This means that Blue Origin intends to start a production line of Mark I landers. At the same time, Blue Origin already has a contract with NASA to develop the much larger Mark II lander, which is intended to carry humans to the lunar surface. Realistically, though, this will not be ready until sometime in the 2030s. Like SpaceX's Starship, it will require multiple refueling launches. As part of this contract, Blue has worked extensively with NASA on a crew cabin for the Mark II lander. So here comes the important part. According to Mr. Berger, based on government sources, Blue Origin has begun preliminary work on a modified version of the Mark I lander, leveraging learnings from the Mark II crew development that could be part of an architecture to land humans on the moon this decade. NASA has not formally requested Blue Origin to work on this technology, but according to a space agency official, the company recognizes the urgency of the need. How would it work? Well, Blue Origin is still architecting this mission, but it would involve multiple Mark I landers to carry the crew down to the lunar surface and then ascend back up to lunar orbit to rendezvous with the Orion spacecraft. Enough work has been done, again, this is according to an unnamed NASA official, that Blue Origin engineers are confident the approach would work. and critically, it would not require any refueling. So how would this work again? Well, in my opinion, the idea is to set one Mark 1 lander on the surface of the moon without anybody on board, with only the necessary propellant and life support to get the astronauts back up to orbit, and another Mark 1 lander to carry them down. Now, other online commentators like Ken Kirtland have put up some alternate ideas as to how this could be accomplished by using an expended version 3 Starship to push the modified Blue Origin Mark 1 lander out to cislunar space, and by using the Mark 3 Starship to take care of at least some of the Delta V, the Blue Moon would have enough to get down to the surface and then back up to the Orion. We're not talking about a lot of Delta V here, but nevertheless, I think you'll be pushing it either way. 2 blue moons might be the best solution overall until the Mark II blue moon that was designed for a crew in the first place comes online. But again, as Eric Berger pointed out, that's unlikely to transpire until the early 2030s. But yes, in my opinion, this is probably the only viable solution right now, because Blue Moon is close to maturity anyway, the cargo version that is. It's going to be launching within a few months, and all you need to do is modify it with a pressurized crew chamber with some life support that they're building anyway for the Mark II version, and maybe you could get the job done with that. Again, you're really going to be pushing things, and you're using 2 lunar landers to set down on the moon, whereas Apollo only used 1. Far from efficient, but a way to get the job done before a better solution comes online. We really have a mess here with Artemis if we are looking at desperate solutions like this to get the job done. But then again, if the alternative is to let China grab the prime real estate at the lunar South Pole first, this might be the only way to go. So, can we get this job done in time? Can we actually convert the Blue Origin Blue Moon lander, the Mark I version, into a human-rated version in time? Well, I think it's going to be a tall order, to say the least, given that the Mark I was not designed to do this, and trying to modify it, trying to pigeonhole this thing into this role at the 11th hour could be very difficult and very dangerous. But at the same time, I must agree with Mr. Berger. I think that we have no other realistic alternatives. We skipped over the best solution, the best lunar lander that had been proposed, the ALPACA, a small-scale, low-slung lander that was really well set up to land on the lunar South Pole. When it came to all of the options that NASA was looking at, ALPACA was by far the best solution to put a few astronauts on the surface of the moon at the South Pole. They absolutely shouldn't have gone with that. I've said that over and over and over again, but unfortunately now it is too late. We need to try to find another option, and that option needs to be found soon. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, for those of you who are big 3i Atlas fans, remember that I've got some 3i Atlas merch right now. All the details are in the description. This is not going to be around a whole lot longer, so if you want to take advantage of all of that, make sure you do so. Thanks again for all the support I've gotten. I'm going to be leaving Australia within the next few days. Such an amazing experience here, but frankly, looking forward to returning to the UK. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay angry about space.